Hello and welcome to the second video in the tutorial series. This is going to be about T1 unit compositions. So we disregard early engineers and we also disregard what I call small raid group and small defense group. These are going to be topics for separate videos. What we do now is we just build armies, large armies. And we're going to take a look at what these armies consists of for good performance. The factions are different, that's why we just look at them one by one. This is a basic Aeon combat group, and it consists of 5 tanks, 1 artillery and 1 scout. Aeon tanks have the highest range of all T1 tanks in the game, but they also have lower HP. That is why we need the scout, because the vision range of the tank is lower than its actual gun range, and the scout is going to provide this extra radar range to the tanks so that they can shoot at their maximum range, and their low HP won't be a problem. 140 HP as compared to 300 HP for other factions. We have 1 artillery in the mix to deal with point defenses and other structures. If we use a Aeon artillery, it is especially important that we target exactly the PD and not the wall segments around it. Because if you miss, then the PD is going to survive. That is because the Aeon artillery has extremely low area of effect damage and it doesn't really miss the target. So it will always hit exactly what you aim for, which is why it's important that you aim for the right thing. Don't be lazy about it and just make a careless click, but actually aim it. Let's move on to the UEF. UEF tanks are more bulky, and the artillery is different. UEF artillery is used to not only counter PD, but it's also fairly effective against a large group of units. The later the game is, the larger armies get, and there isn't going to be much space in between lots of units. And if the RT fires at an enemy tank and there are 10 enemy tanks around it, chances are that the RT is going to kill several tanks in one projectile, even if the tank it originally aimed at is now elsewhere. Just because there are so many units, it's just going to hit something, several units at the same time. And because UEF artillery is also fairly good against units and not only against structures, like the Aeon RT, we have a higher density of artillery in the UEF composition. So we go for only 4 tanks, 1 scout, 1 RT, instead of 5 tanks, 1 scout, 1 RT. And for Cybran, the situation is the same. Cybran have a fairly good artillery. It is weaker against structures. It has lower damage than the UEF counterpart, but it has an electromagnetic pulse. And this is stunning units and making it extra efficient against units. Maybe another word about the scouts of these 2 factions. Losing them doesn't hurt too much because the unit range is not affected, but they are still good to have because UEF tanks are fairly slow and you need the scout to spot the enemy beforehand to move in between. Let's say the enemy units are trying to kill the engineer behind the group. They are trying to flank, and you need to intercept in time. And you can only do it if you have a scout, or like some other form of intel, such as an air scout or radar. But a scout in the mix is always a good idea. And for Cybran, well, the scout range is lower than the scout range of the UEF. But that's not a problem, because the Cybran tanks are faster than the UEF tanks. So even if you spot the units later, you have more time to react because of the unit speed. And for Seraphim the situation is different again. Well, first, the tank in terms of speed is a compromise between the Cybran and the UEF. Like, you don't have the maximum speed of the Cybran, but you don't like have the basically non-Aeon minimal speed of the UEF. You have like the direct compromise between. And Seraphim benefits a lot from the artillery, which is the best artillery in the game and extremely strong. So you want to have a lot of artillery in the mix, and you achieve it by using 3 tanks, 1 artillery. But since we don't want to have 3 tanks, 1 artillery, and 1 scout multiple times, because that would be too many scouts, we are just going to queue up 6 tanks and 2 artilleries, and then add 1 scout. This is to ensure that the mix doesn't become inconsistent, because let's say you would go for the 2 scouts. Then if you zoom out and you have lots of these groups, then the army will look larger than the army of the enemy, even though it actually isn't, because it consists mainly of scouts. So if you try to compare, like, the enemy has 20 units, I have 20 units, if your mix is consistent, then you can attack. But if your mix is inconsistent because you have like tons of scouts in it, then you know that the units that actually participate actively in the fighting are going to be less. So just keep your mix consistent. That's the message pretty much. And you can see that there are some extra units, like anti-air and engineer, behind each group. And the reason we have those is that they are certainly needed. Engineers are needed for multiple reasons. First, whenever there's some battle, there's going to be reclaim left behind. And the engineer can grab the dead units and put them back into your economy and reinvest them into like new tanks. That's why you have the engineer in the first place. But if you manage to hold some ground for a longer time, you can also like grab the mass extractors. And you can secure them with a PD as well. And it's also common to use engineers for radar creeping. If you don't want to rely on scouts too much, or you're just not happy with the vision they provide, you get some extra radars. And you just build radars as you advance towards the enemy. This way you will always have vision. And sorry, misclick. And if your forward radar dies, you still have extra radars in the back, so that you always keep track of what the enemy has and where he is using his units. And the mobile anti-air is important because it's capable of stopping Mercies. This is the perspective of a team player. I would say most 1v1 players would not think of adding a single mobile anti-air to their combat group. But in team games, you usually see Mercy snipes, like it's quite common. So Mercy is a unit that doesn't really have HP, but it deals over 2000 damage to, for example, an ACU. That's why for lots of units in your mix, having one anti-air is always a good idea. Like even if it's just one, because the single anti-air can take care of the Mercies and it can save your life. Well, that's why I always include it in my mix, pretty much. But the reason we have this mix and we don't just put one engineer in, one anti-air in, and it's done, is consistency. Because if we have one engineer for each combat group and one anti-air for each combat group, then our army will look much greater than it actually is, and we might suicide it into the enemy army. And to prevent this, we are changing the composition by queuing up our basic mix several times, like this. And we are putting the engineers in between. So now we have 3 combat groups and just 2 engineers. And that's not too crazy. That's actually fine. And we can also add 1 anti-air. So these are maybe like, I don't know, 18 or 20, something like that, units in the mix. And if one of them is an anti-air, it's not going to hurt our army in terms of consistency. But again, this one anti-air can save our life against Mercies. So it's good to have. And for the other factions, we are doing the same thing. I have this queued up already, but I can do it again quickly. Like, I'm taking several combat groups, and I'm putting some engineers in between, and the anti-air on the end. And same for the other factions, really. Like, no difference. And well, Seraphim, since the combat groups are larger for Seraphim, since we use 6 tanks instead of just 4 or 5. We don't have to care about the engineers too much. Like, having 1 engineer per each 9 units is going to be fine. So the reason we still queue this up twice, like the 1 Cylin, the 6 tanks, and the 2 arties, here and there, is the anti-air. Like, we really don't want to overbuild the anti-air. That's why we queued up twice, add an engineer in between, and have this extra anti-air. And this is your basic T1 unit composition.